Current archaeological VR and 3D. So much of my discussion of 3D so far has revolved around a frankly pretty old reconstruction of Çatalhöyük in Second Life. The current state of play is different, but involves some similar concerns. There are several different development kits and platforms. While these are increasingly accessible to us and considerably streamlined, indeed we teach most of the software in the department at a master's level, mastery of these is arguably as difficult as before. It is frankly not that lucrative to model 3D for heritage when you could go work for, say, a gaming company. Still, it is increasingly part of the archaeological toolkit, but still perhaps slightly overhyped. Archaeology is making forays into the full spectrum of digitally enhanced experiences, including virtual reality, as discussed, augmented reality, which grounds the person in the real world with digital overlays, and merged or mixed reality, where you can manipulate both real and digital elements at the same time. I'll be speaking mostly about augmented reality in this lecture, but we'll talk a little bit more about mixed reality in the next lecture. The leading proponent of augmented reality in archaeology is arguably Dr. Stuart Eve, who is now at Bournemouth. His project, Dead Men's Eyes, was a system created with a smartphone, an Adorno microcontroller, and Unity 3D, which brought the sights, sounds, and smells of the past into the present, located on site at Leskernik Hill. Eve titles this an embodied GIS, wherein multisensory developments can be harnessed and linked to a traditional GIS database using mixed reality. Eve writes, "The data need to be able to be sensualized, as if they were directly there in the landscape, overlaid on the hills, plains, and rivers themselves, reacting, developing, and changing as one moves through the space. One should be able to walk around the data, through the data, and query and update the data." To do this, he reconstructed the houses on Leskernik Hill, an early Bronze Age site in the northeastern part of Bodmin Moor in Cornwall. These were famously excavated by Barbara Bender and Chris Tilley to inform their experimental phenomenological work. During this work, a wealth of data were collected, including survey, phenomenological, and excavation records, making an ideal candidate for testing the embodied GIS. When viewing the reconstructions, it became more clear how the houses were stacked up together, and views from these houses were occluded by the landscape or other houses. During the previous work, it was supposed that the Bronze Age people looked out of their doorways to the wonderful landscape of Bodmin Moor, or to the nearest burial mound, but most of them merely saw the backs of other houses. Eve has created other works, such as this augmented reality set for identifying zooarchaeological remains, and this mixed reality Roman fort. I will link to both of these videos on the VLE, but this example is a paper fort which he builds and then has small Roman soldiers run all over it. There is also brilliant augmented reality being done by others. This is a video created by Kieran Baxter, which highlights the prehistoric archaeology in the Catathons. This video won an AHRC prize and has been replicated by several people at other sites. I will let it play through, but will also link to it in the resources for this week if you do not want to watch the whole thing within Panopto. The film is gorgeous, but think about the potential consequences of presenting heritage in this way. It is magical, mystical, the buildings seem to build themselves, and we view them at a godlike distance. Where is Eve's more humane view from Leskernik, where we only see the other enclosures? With this, we come to a discussion of photorealism. This can be a taken for granted that if things look more real, they are better, right? Franklin queried this with heritage and archaeology academics and non-academics. He found that the academics preferred less photoreal reconstructions as it better showed that our interpretation was not necessarily the only one or the correct one. For example, archaeologists preferred a more watercolor treatment, such as illustration 2, whereas the public preferred illustration 3. When I was creating Çatalhöyük in Second Life, I found that the most important thing was to be visually consistent. If things looked too photorealistic, it was out of sync with the cartoonish aesthetic found in the rest of the world. With that, we go on to photogrammetry and structure for motion. We won't go too deeply into the technical aspects of photogrammetry, but it is one option that you may explore for your summative. Photogrammetry is a key technology in digital archaeology at the moment, as it produces distortion-free images that allow the measurement of true distances. Software such as Agisoft can geolocate digital archaeology within a locally rectified environment. It uses algorithms to reconstruct spatial information from 2D data, with common points tracked across images. So, a set of photos taken from multiple angles can provide enough spatial information for a computer to mimic a human understanding of space, and it can be used on a fairly large scale, such as buildings and on artifacts. This is an example of the photo array that is required to create a photogrammetric model or structure for motion model. As previously mentioned in the photography lectures, the increased use of photogrammetry in archaeology has consequences. The explosion of data and the lack of archival is very problematic for a vocation that destroys the thing it studies. As noted by the Archaeology Data Service, we stand to enter a new digital dark age with potentially less than 10% of data surviving. What use is a fancy 3D model if you do not have the software that can read it 5 to 10 years from now? There's actually a pretty good argument to be made for some of the older ways of recording archaeology. Archival paper and glass lantern slides last a lot longer. Finally, we come to archaeogaming. Archaeologists have been examining video games for over 30 years, but the subject has become more popular in recent years, with several PhD students here at York and other places looking at video games as part of their research. Archaeogaming, coined by Andrew Reinhardt, one of these York PhDs, has several complementary aspects to the research. There have been several examinations of archaeological representation within video games, from Lara Croft and Tomb Raider to Dragon Age. So, should you break that ancient pot to get to the treasure? Reinhardt tried to investigate games archaeologically, documenting places in No Man's Sky and other games. There are other examples of how people use games to understand the past and to educate other people about the past. There are now books about archaeogaming which presents much of this work. The book on the left, The Interactive Past, is freely downloadable, and part of it is assigned for this week's reading. As stated in the reading assigned for this week, Tara Copplestone describes how video games can help us think about, create, and communicate the past and the impact they might have on archaeological theory. Tara was interested in how archaeologists and game developers do or do not communicate and what their goals were in making games based on the past. She found that game devs couldn't really translate our traditional academic outputs, books, journal articles, monographs, into games. They'd often look at, say, Wikipedia or more popular news articles. Archaeologists, on the other hand, felt that video games were a problematic format for presenting the past. Game devs thought of the past as systems interactions, agency, and multilinear narratives, whereas archaeologists describe the past as physical things, linear narratives, known outcomes of a process. This suggests that archaeologists could actually learn a lot about how to understand and present the past from game developers. While there's been much chagrin about the representation of past people in archaeology within video games, it has been getting a bit better, markedly through the Assassin's Creed series, who use archaeologists and historians to add authority and authenticity to their games. Educational versions of these games have also started to become popular. While the photorealism of games such as Assassin's Creed is appreciated, Minecraft has also been an incredibly useful and popular tool for archaeological outreach. A few years ago, we had several events where the children would attempt to rebuild Star Car. The event was incredibly popular, but only partially successful. The children would generally figure out how to try to murder each other or blow up buildings fairly quickly. And finally, we do a series of Professor Play events where we bring York archaeologists to comment on video games. This instance had Nikki Milner and Matthew Collins commenting on Far Cry Primal. We did this as well with Joe Fletcher commenting on the detailed Egyptian scenes in Assassin's Creed Origins, and we hope to have a similar event with Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and I'm sure that Steve Ashby cannot wait. Finally, I hope you get some inspiration from these lectures. Students from last year ended up creating a gigantic Minecraft world full of archaeological sites.